prehistoric little games. 65 million years ago, dinosaurs ruled the earth. These prehistoric primates have captured the imagination of both junior and senior archaeologists ever since. There have been lots of speculation as to who or what lived during this era. There was also speculation on whether or not the Flintstones car wash actually existed. Today, we are going to take a look at a major 1993 arcade one-on-one fighter that features stop-motion animation and a unique control aspect to boot. The game in question is Primal Rage, and it was released by Atari to compete with Street Fighter II. What 1960s film directly influenced the creation of this game? So let's head back to the Mesozoic era so we can learn about the history of Primal Rage. The year is 1992 when Street Fighter II has captured the hearts and the wallets of arcade goers everywhere. The one-on-one fighting genre was upon us, and clones upon clones were crawling out of the woodwork. The upper echelon at Atari Games were insisting upon a fighting game to capitalize on Street Fighter's success. Something else that the entire world would soon be enthralled with would be the impending release of Steven Spielberg's Jurassic Park film. The concept of dinosaurs duking it out was introduced a year prior in the 1992 Taito arcade game Dino Rex, which was a one-on-one fighter featuring the prehistoric pugilist. The sprites were absolutely huge in this game, and to be honest, that was pretty much everything the game had going for it. The animation and controls were definitely not up to snuff. Atari veteran Dennis Harper, who had worked on various classic arcade games such as Tubin, Roadrunner, and every skateboarding fanatic video gamer's dream, 720 Degrees. Had come up with the idea of fighting dinosaurs during an Atari brainstorming session. The group would get together and attempt to come up with the next big thing in arcade games. Art director Jason Leong mentioned to Mr. Harper that he had come up with the concept previously and produced a number of sketches showing his dinosaurs going at it. They decided to team up and bring their vision to life. Harper wanted to give his creatures an extra level of detail and texture which had not been previously seen in any sort of video game, so he figured there was only one way to do this, and that was through the use of stop-motion animation. He had been a fan of Ray Harryhausen and the various creatures he brought to life on the big screen, and thought this would be perfect for his game. Of course, this wasn't the first game to be directly influenced by Ray Harryhausen. Golden Axe did it with their sword-fighting skeletons as well. The higher-ups at Atari were not so enthusiastic with his pitch though. Mr. Harper asked for a month to complete a demo and got to work using the stop-motion film The Valley of the Gwangi as its basis. They painstakingly found dinosaur poses they liked throughout the film and cut pieces from each one which they could animate separately. What they ended up with was a crude demo which showcased one dinosaur running around biting another dinosaur. Crude or not, it got the project green lit at Atari. Mr. Leong got to work creating various dinosaurs along with their attributes, and while these two knew enough about video game design, what they didn't know was stop-motion animatronics. Atari hired Dan Platt, who had worked on Gremlins 2 and Terminator 2, as well as Pete Kleinow, who had worked on Land of the Lost and The Empire Strikes Back, to create armatured models of each dinosaur. Each clay figure was cast in a mold, and then the puppeteer would build an intricate, detailed skeleton. The skeleton was placed inside the mold, which was injected with latex that became the skin of the dinosaur. Finally, each one would have to be painted and detailed, which drove the price up to $50,000 for each one. When it came for the stop-motion animation, a similar process had been done with Dino Rex and even Mortal Kombat, but this game upped the ante when it came to the animation. Each character had over 400 frames of animation, which resulted in smooth, expressive movements usually reserved for big-budget Hollywood films. Mr. Harper made no bones about it. He considered Street Fighter II a perfect game and wanted to replicate it as much as possible, except when it came to the controls. Rather than a traditional Street Fighter moveset in which you move the joystick and press a button, the designers decided to switch it up and differentiate it from Capcom's #1 fighter. In order to do a move, you would have to hold a button or two down and then perform the joystick movement. Looking back in hindsight, Mr. Harper felt this was a mistake and should not have changed the controls that drastically. The team at Atari also struggled to get the AI to work properly. The two-player mode was working great, but the AI didn't know what to do in single-player mode. They ended up quizzing various Street Fighter players on combos, attack methods, etc. to flesh out the gameplay. Something else to help differentiate itself from Street Fighter was the blood and gore. While not as spine-rippingly brutal as Mortal Kombat, it did unleash buckets of blood and a fair amount of urination domination. Primal Rage roared into the arcades in 1993. As the story goes, a meteor has crashed into the Earth which destroys civilization. What's left of humanity reverts into tribes of Stone Age dwellers. 7 creatures with supernatural abilities awaken from their deep slumber within the Earth's crust and are immediately worshipped as gods by the humans. The various beasts each have to fight one another to determine the one true ruler of the Earth. There are 7 characters to choose from, including Blizzard, Armadon, Talon, Sauron, Chaos, Vertigo, and Diablo. You have 4 attack buttons, including a quick and fierce button as well as a low and high attack. Thankfully, you can still pull back on the joystick to block. In addition to a life bar, which is actually an artery connected to a beating heart, which the closer to death you become, the faster it pulsates until it finally explodes when you die. You also have a brainstem meter under your health bar that depletes with the more damage you take, but it will refill slowly. If it becomes completely drained, your character will be stunned. Similar to Tekken or Samurai Showdown, if your character receives a certain amount of damage in a single combo, it will go into a berserker mode, giving him extra strength for a comeback. Each character also has 3 different fatalities or finishing moves. Some of these can get fairly bloody, but most are pretty harmless, including turning your opponent into a cow with the obligatory moo. Others, though, are pretty disgusting, such as Chaos's vomit finisher, as well as his pee finisher. In this one, the The giant prehistoric ape decides that the best way to finish off his opponent is to take a giant whiz all over them. This isn't your typical golden shower because after your opponent receives the goods, he is melted into a mushy pulp of bones and ash. Thankfully, smoke clouds cover up the majority of the dirty deed, but rumor has it the stop-motion puppet's mouth was open. Here are some of my favorite fatalities from the game. Speaking of the blood and gore, there are also little human worshippers that follow after each character on the screen and react as the battle progresses. They cheer when their god inflicts damage and are sad when he is losing. At certain points in the game, if you pull off a combo or get a dizzy, the worshippers will run out from the foreground and start bowing at their god's feet. At this point, either player can snatch them off the ground and eat them alive, earning a little bit of health back. That is, if you're eating the ones who are non-believers. If you end up eating one of the people who are worshipping you, it actually takes energy away. The tiny little humans running around are actually digitized characters similar to Mortal Kombat. The designers, who were actually sniffing glue when designing the original controls, backpedaled just a bit and in later revisions of the game changed the play system to resemble something a little more similar to Street Fighter. You still have to hold multiple buttons to pull off special moves, but at least you can perform the joystick movement first and the button press last. Combos are a big part in the game. There are no dial-up combos as found in Mortal Kombat 3, so you do have a bit more freedom. Thankfully, the game will stop infinites and cheap moves. If you do something it considers cheesy, it will actually show a no cheese sign and end your combo. After you defeat all 7 gods, including a mirror match, and become ruler of the earth, you are put into a bonus round where you need to eat as many worshippers as possible to prepare you for the final battle. Now you would think the final battle would be the boss of the game, similar to Shao Kahn in Mortal Kombat, but that is just not the case. It's actually an endurance round in which you have to face all the previous bosses in one go with one long health bar. Supposedly, a final boss was being designed, but the developers ran out of time. Once you make it through this, you are given a personalized ending with a screen of text telling you what happened to your character and a nice detailed picture to go along with it. As you can see, the graphics are fantastic with smooth animation and lots of varied locations to do battle in. The backgrounds are extremely detailed with smooth parallax scrolling as well. The sound effects are loud with plenty of grunts and groans as you would expect from the dinosaurs of that era. There was a lot of hype for the arcade game and it was a decent sized hit. Pretty soon the merchandise started rolling out and quite a few things were on offer such as t-shirts, board games, slide projectors. There was also a handheld Tiger LCD game, and really nice action figures from Playmates.
After these messages, we'll be right back.
Get ready to erupt into primal rage. But be warned, these guys don't just kick butt, they slam it, crush it, and trash it. And now they're even bigger. 4 tasty follower figures take a bite out of their killer appetite. Now even more rage is in your hands with Primal Rage and Super Rage action figures from Playmates.
Before we talk about the conversions, I have to at least make mention of the unproduced sequel Primal Rage 2. As soon as work was complete on the first Primal Rage, and Atari saw that it was going to be a decent-sized hit, the developers got to work on a follow-up with the working title of Rage 2. Mr. Harper, who was also in charge of Rage 2, always felt that one of the reasons that the game was a success was that it was all about the monsters. The higher-ups at Atari felt that the reason the game wasn't more successful is that there weren't any humans to play as. Mr. Harper did not want to include any humans as this would make them essentially go toe-to-toe with the other human-based juggernaut which was Street Fighter II. Mr. Harper did not get his way. They decided on human-based avatars in which the dinosaurs can morph into during battle. The reason the game was canceled was because home systems were getting just as powerful as their arcade counterparts, so this caused the mom-and-pop arcades to die at an alarming rate. Once Atari realized this, they canceled the project. Rumors began to circulate that there were 2 working prototypes which were seen at least a couple of times at Golfland in California. In 2014, the game was put on permanent display at the Ultimate Retro Fan Games Holiest of Holes Galloping Ghost in Chicago. In 2017, YouTuber Gruntzilla94 managed to get the arcade ROMs up and running so anyone can download the game and check it out for themselves. Strangely enough, we did get Primal Rage 2 toys from Playmates even though the planned arcade game was never released. The game was converted to a number of systems including, believe it or not, the Jaguar CD, although we will get to that in just a bit. I also wanted to make mention that the various home systems also have a couple of mini-games built in. The first one is a volleyball game in which you use the worshippers and smack them back and forth over the net. The other one is a bowling game. In this one, you roll Armadon across the screen to knock over 10 worshippers who were assembled like bowling pins. The game only lasts for 2 frames, but what a surprise discovering this, especially when it was released on the home systems back in the day.
Primal Rage! The #1 arcade smash hit is coming home! Everything a hardcore fighter would want. EGM2 says, with great graphics and excellent techniques, I love this game! PC Gamer declares, arcade purists will love that this uses the source code of the coin-op game. Die Hard Game Fan states, one of the more impressive games in recent memory. I was amazed by the character graphics and animation. with animations and special effects produced by Hollywood artists. Special moves, hit combos, and deadly fatalities. Turn off the blood with the no gore play option. Prepare to rage again.
The Sega Genesis conversion starts us off, and while the game definitely is not the worst one on our list, it most certainly is not the best one either. The sound effects and music have definitely taken a hit, which tends to happen quite often with Sega arcade conversions. Despite all of the character sprites being shrunk in size, we are still missing lots of animation from the arcade game, making for a choppy mess when it comes to the actual gameplay. The colors are washed out and the sprites tend to blend in with the backgrounds. There is absolutely no censorship in this game, and that even includes the urination fatality from Chaos. This port was developed on revision 1.7 of the arcade source code, which explains why the gameplay feels off and also why the characters only have 2 fatalities instead of 3. This has happened in the past when home conversions are being developed concurrently with the arcade original, which was the same issue that WWF WrestleMania the arcade game had. Let's up the ante just a bit and check out the 3DO version. The sprites are much larger than the 16-bit counterparts and the colors look really good. In still shots, the graphics closely resemble the arcade original. The game has been brought over pretty much intact, although they did include a rudimentary CGI intro with a female narrator who sounds like she's on the can reading instructions for a pregnancy test. The game will also load the victory animation for each character, so there is a short pause after winning each match, which does get a bit annoying when trying to play it. The controls are fine, so if you are used to the arcade game, you should feel right at home here. The Game Boy received its own black and white version of the game. Now I've seen some slow, ugly, responsive things in my life, but this one takes the cake. For starters, Vertigo was missing from this version entirely. The AI of the game is a joke, which makes the game far too easy. The game controls like a petrified turd. If you thought the Genesis version was too choppy, then whatever you do, don't look at this version. The animation frames are dropped as quick as a fart in an elevator. Combine this with the barren backgrounds and the painfully tinny music and sound effects, and you've got the recipe for possibly the worst conversion of Primal Rage. Gameplay-wise, the Game Gear version is almost identical to the Game Boy. A healthy splash of color goes a long way, but it doesn't help with the still missing frames of animation. The backgrounds are much more detailed in this version, but everything else is pretty much the same, including the omission of Vertigo. The sound effects and music are still stinky, although not as bad as the Game Boy version. The Amiga version was ported from the Sega Genesis version, so you know where this review is headed. As the old saying goes, you can't polish a turd, and this game doesn't dispute that statement. Already bland colors and lack of animation frames, unfortunately, are made even worse on the Amiga. The game comes on 4 floppy disks, so even with an external drive, you'll still need to do a fair amount of swapping. As a matter of fact, on the final battle after each character you defeat, you have to stop and load in the next boss. It really disrupts the gameplay, but what can you do, especially back in the day with floppy disks? The sound effects and music are really good, with excellent jungle beats and grunts and groans of the various dinosaurs. At the time, the Amiga was a bit hard up when it came to decent fighting games, and this one had a tendency to stand out due to its unique graphics and gameplay. For a standard Amiga fighter, it's pretty good, although it's definitely not what we would consider a classic. If you were lucky enough to own the toilet bowl known as the Jaguar CD, then you could play a pretty good version of Primal Rage. First off though, the load times are atrocious on an actual Jaguar unit. Surprisingly, the graphics are pretty faithful to the arcade original, although the sprite size have been scaled down just a tad. If you are playing on an actual Jaguar system, the first thing you want to do is grab a Pro controller because the standard pad just won't cut it. The animation is fairly smooth with not too many dropped frames. The sound effects and music are very nice with excellent use of jungle beats and dinosaurs beating the heck out of each other. This version does have a tug of war option where 2 players can compete over a single life bar as they fight each other trying to gain the upper hand. It's one of the better fighters available on the Atari Jaguar. The other 16-bit system on our list is the Super Nintendo version. This looks really good when compared to the Sega Genesis, but for some reason it's very dark. This version was based off of revision 2.3, meaning most of the arcade content was transferred over, including 3 fatalities per character. Although we still don't get the full arcade endings for each character. The game is definitely more colorful, but it is a bit slower than the Genesis counterpart and is still missing just as many frames of animation. Something else missing is the Golden Shower fatality for Chaos. If you successfully pull off the move, you get a no sign flashed on the screen instead. If I could reference a Seinfeld episode for just one moment, let me just say, Nopey for you! The controls are decent, although not quite as tight as the arcade game. The MS-DOS version is really well done. The game comes on a standard CD-ROM, so we get the actual music and sound effects from the arcade game. The PC version was based off of the arcade source code, so it is very close in terms of playability. The graphics look really good with large sprites and detailed animated backgrounds. For some reason, the game is running at a slightly lower resolution, but it's really not too noticeable. A training version was added to this version, as well as the ability to use the keyboard. Back in the day, I used this configuration a whole lot more than I did a PC gamepad. Everything from the arcade game has been included, so be sure and check this out if you are a fan. The 32X version of Primal Rage is a bit of a mixed bag. Graphically, it looks good and it's really similar to the Super Nintendo version. It seems as if this version has a bit more frames of animation on the characters as well. Apparently, the 32X handles the actual sprites while the Genesis handles the backgrounds. While the graphics look a whole lot better, the same gameplay flaws are still intact. Similar to the Sega Genesis version, this one is also based off of revision 1.7, meaning there are still some missing things, and the balance of the characters haven't been ironed out yet. The Sega Saturn version looks really close to the arcade game thanks to the powerful Sega Saturn architecture. Large, detailed sprites and fairly smooth animation are what's for dinner, as well as the actual soundtrack and sound effects from the arcade game. It's not arcade perfect as there are still a few frames of animation missing, and it does run at a slightly lower resolution. The load times are also horrendous, but everything else is great. The Saturn version does offer up a few exclusive features, such as introductory cutscenes for each character. The character endings are also replaced with FMVs by default, but you can change this in the options. Something else this game features is Red Book audio, which even the PlayStation 1 version did not have. Speaking of the PlayStation version, it's pretty good, although not quite up there with the Sega Saturn version. Graphically, it is very close to its Sega rival, but it's missing a few more frames of animation. Audio-wise, it's another story. There is absolutely no background music while you play. Apparently, this can be remedied by playing the game on a PS3 for whatever reason. The controls are pretty good, although it is a bit hard to get into the gameplay with such choppy animation. And the last version we are looking at is on the compilation Midway Arcade Treasures 2. Let me also mention that this is probably the best way to play Primal Rage at home, and yes, that even includes the arcade emulator MAME. To this day, there is still some nasty copy protection that hasn't been decrypted yet, which results in glitchy gameplay and missing moves. All omissions aside, this looks and sounds fantastic regardless of which version you have. The compilation was released for Xbox, PlayStation 2, and GameCube. And that takes care of the history of Primal Rage. Dinosaurs have always fascinated me, especially when I was a young child. The hype for Jurassic Park helped rekindle my interest in these prehistoric creatures, so naturally I was drawn to this game. The controls do take a little bit of getting used to, but once you do, you'll realize that it's not just a standard crappy dinosaur fighting game, but one that is much deeper than it seems. If you've never had a chance to punch out a T-Rex and then take a giant whiz on him, be sure and give this game a shot. You'll be glad you did. If you enjoyed this prehistoric video, be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Also, If you would like to support me on Patreon, please click the link below. Thank you all so much for watching.